Rabbi Seth Castleman was the first person I thought of when I thought of this year's Hanukkah message. I realized I have done 21 years of Hanukkah messages, and I don't really have anything new to say about this. So I thought, how fabulous to bring our good friend who's been here a couple of times. Rabbi Seth is also trained in Buddhism as well as Judaism, and he is a meditation teacher. He's a fabulous storyteller, and he really knows spiritual practice, and I love that about him. I also love that he does work in this world that brings the love of God and the hope of God and the success of God into those people who are starting anew, people who have been incarcerated and who are getting out and who need some help mentoring, being mentored back into the society. So I'm grateful for that work. It's called the Exodus Project, and maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that as well. But will you join me at home in welcoming Rabbi Seth Castleman? Rabbi?
Thank you, Reverend Georgia. It's always a delight to be here, always a delight to see you. Mentioned, we are the light. And these are indeed dark times. Dark and troubled times that we live in with COVID, with economic crisis, with political crisis, with systemic racism. And yet we've had troubled times the world over since the beginning of time. And faith traditions, one and all, have holy days to remind us how to celebrate finding the light in these dark times. And many of them, Judaism included, Christianity as well, Hinduism with Diwali, celebrate a holiday in the darkest days of the year as we approach the winter solstice. In Judaism, Hanukkah or Hanukkah, if you really want to pronounce it, is a story about finding little miracles in dark times. But I'll tell you right off that I'm not one who believes in a theology where God is pulling the marionette strings of life and making good things happen over here and bad things happen over there. So the Hanukkah story in some ways works for me, like most of the Jewish stories, as a myth, as a spiritual teaching. Let me tell you a little bit of the story. I'll sum it up like this. They tried to kill us. We survived. Now let's eat. Now the extrapolation from that. It was in the time of the Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, and they were spreading Greek religion and culture the world over. They took over Jerusalem. They ransacked the Holy Temple. And they were so afraid of Judaism and the Jews that they said anyone who practiced any form of Judaism would be killed. Somehow, through perhaps a miracle, great or small, a small band of bandits, really, we would call them zealots today, came down out of the hills and attacked the Syrian Greeks and won back Jerusalem and won back the temple. They cleaned out what had been ransacked. They renewed what had been destroyed. And they rededicated the temple to holiness, to God, to their faith and their tradition. This was in 200 or so before the Common Era, a couple hundred years before the time of Jesus. And some 600 years later, when the rabbis are discussing this strange local custom that people have of lighting menorahs at this time of year and celebrating Hanukkah, what do the rabbis say? They say, "What is this Hanukkah?" And it really boiled down to this. The rabbis were not so excited about the little people of the Jews getting together and trying to stand up militarily against big forces. They figured it worked once. It's probably not going to work again. And they were pacifists, no less. They didn't want to celebrate military victories. So instead of the victory and the miracle of the military victory, they came up with a story, really, which was that all the sacred oil that kept the sacred menorah in the temple burning had all been smashed, all except for one bottle, enough to keep the menorah burning for just one day. And yet it would take them 8 days to make more oil and sanctify it. And yet, as you know, likely, as the story goes, the oil burned for 8 days. And this was the great miracle. The miracle that one candle can dispel eons of darkness. That light is an element that does not follow the conservation of matter or energy. One little candle can light up a whole room without losing its own light. And isn't that true with sacredness, with the divine? We don't diminish God by letting God into our hearts and our lives. The more we see the divinity in each other, the more divinity there is to be had. It's like a flower giving off seeds. It doesn't lose, it gains. So the first miracle that I want to speak about is the miracle of faith. For we can understand the miracle on the second night, after the oil should have already burned out and yet it was still burning, and the third and the fourth, and all the more so on the eighth night, when that one little vessel of oil was still burning. But on the first night, the rabbis say there was a miracle there as well. And it was the miracle of faith that the people decided to light the menorah, even though they only had 1 day's worth. That they had the faith that maybe something would happen. The faith of showing up, of doing something. Which leads us on to the miracle of effort. Of being a presence that shows up and does something. When the Holy Temple was lost, overrun by the Greeks, they rebuilt it, and yet it's not about that place. It's about what's in each one of us and the efforts that we can make inside of us. For even in the book of Exodus, it says, God speaking, "Build me a sanctuary, and I will dwell amongst them." It doesn't say, "Build me a sanctuary, and I will dwell within it." It says, "I will dwell amongst them." Within them. This is the human soul. This is the effort that each one of us makes to show up and be a receptacle of God. A place of divinity and purity that, of course, gets covered up and mucked up, that gets hidden away, that gets forgotten about, that gets distrusted or ignored. But as we say in Judaism every morning, "Oh my God, the soul which you bestowed in me is pure." With effort, we can return back to this purity that God is within each and every one of us. Regardless of what we do, we are a sanctuary of peace, a sanctuary of God. And this brings us to the miracle of grace. A word we don't use in Judaism so much, but one I do see a lot in my work with returning citizens, men and women coming out of incarceration from jail or prison and returning to the world, needing a helping hand perhaps, and needing some grace. And so many of them have it. So many people find a new sense of faith or religion or God when incarcerated. But what about when they come back into the world? What about when Alex shows up on our doorstep about a year ago and says, "I want to work, but I can't find a job"? And when we found him a job, he showed up every single day, 45 minutes early, just to make sure he got there on time on the bus. We gave him some bus passes for that first week, and he wanted to make sure that he paid us back for those bus passes. I passed the money on to another one of our mentees, but it was his spirit, his grace of wanting to make sure that what comes around goes around. I'm reminded of the steady heart that the great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about. during the Vietnam War when so many boat people were leaving Vietnam and escaping. The steadiness of heart when the ships, the little boats, overrun with people trying to escape the war, would be attacked by pirates, would be swept over by storms, would be sunk by panic. All it would take would be one calm, steady person with the grace of God with them that could steady the boat, could calm the panic, could steer the ship to shore. As it says in the book of prophets, what does God ask of us, Micah says? Well, in some ways, what God asks of us is to be that calm, steady presence in the face of whatever disaster, whatever darkness we are facing and the world is facing. We are in one great big boat all together in this fragile world with climate change, with COVID, with so many challenges. We need each of you to be that steady hand, to settle the panic, to be the miracle of grace. Sometimes we have it and sometimes we don't. One of my favorite books of poetry these days is by a poet, John Kenny, and his book is called Love Poems for People with Children, which you'll understand when I read you this poem. It's called Family Vacation. This is relaxing, I think to myself, on the first day of our vacation, as I hide in the men's room of a Roy Rogers at a rest stop, just off bumper to bumper I-95, while the kids continue fighting with tennis rackets in the back seat, and only 5 more hours to go. I don't want to leave this place, I whisper aloud. Neither do I, says the man in the next stall. Sometimes we just have to go into the bathroom by ourselves and get our wits back about us, pick ourselves up, and go back out there. And when we go back out there, it brings us to the miracle of generosity and kindness. The wonderful Palestinian-American poet Naomi Shihab Nye writes about kindness. She says, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all of this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. The miracle of kindness perhaps shows up in no greater way than our presence with each other. The kindness of simply being there for a loved one, for a friend, for a total stranger. The miracle of presence. I learned this lesson quite aptly some years ago in the presence of my great-aunt Harriet. Harriet I like to say, was the wisest, kindest, most beautiful woman I ever met before my wife. Long before I ever knew Harriet, she had a stroke so that one side of her face had fallen. And she always had a smile on the other side and a twinkle in her eye, as if she was laughing at the joy in the world. But this side of her face always had a frown and was always weeping, as if she was crying at the sadness in the world. Harriet and I had a strong connection. All through my childhood, I was, I dare say, her favorite. And even into adulthood, I would go and visit her periodically. But then, after moving out to California, some years went by, and I hadn't seen her in quite some time, and I knew she had aged quite a bit. But I was back in Boston for some work in the prisons there, and went to a wedding where Harriet was going to be, and other family members. I ended up being late for the wedding. I missed the ceremony, but went to the reception at one of the big hotels in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I walked into the function hall, and I was a little taken aback. I was a little shy about being there late. I didn't recognize anybody. I thought maybe I was in the wrong room, and then I spotted my Aunt Harriet. She was sitting at one of the luncheon tables eating, and I went over and I squatted down next to her. And I said loudly, because her hearing was largely gone, I said, "Harriet, it's so good to see you." She looked up from her plate and she looked over at me. And she said, "Oh, dear, it's so good to see you. I'm so glad you're here." And suddenly all my anxiety and distress about being late and not recognizing anybody all dissipated. And she just stared in my eyes, and I felt so loved. She took my hand and she stroked it. She took her hands and she stroked my cheeks, and she said, "Oh, you look so wonderful. Your hair, your cheeks, your smile." I felt so loved. I said, "I missed the wedding ceremony." She said, "That's okay, but Rachel was a beautiful bride. You should have been there. It was wonderful. But it's so wonderful to see you." After a few minutes of this satsang of sort, this presence in each other's love, I started to stand up and said, "I'll go get some lunch and I'll be right back." She said, "Oh, that'd be wonderful. Don't be long. But just one thing. Who are you?" I'm Seth. I'm Paul's son, your great-nephew, Seth Castleman." "Oh, right. It's so good to see you." Well, as I went through the lunch line, I started to get a bit distressed. Was Harriet losing her memory and her mental faculties? And besides that, was it not me who she was so loving to? Was it not me who she loved? But by the time I got to the end of the line and had gotten my food, it dawned on me how selfish that was, to be thinking about me, my, and mine. That it really was a remarkable thing that she could give so much love to whomever happened to be standing in front of her. It also reassured me that a few other people didn't recognize me. I had shaved my beard and grown my hair long, and I didn't look like I was the last time I had been in Boston. But to have that sort of presence for whomever stands in front of us, what a miraculous gift that I could only hope to have a small taste of myself to give to others. As we come to the winter solstice and the shortest day, as we come to the time of Hanukkah, which starts on Thursday night, and the sixth night next Tuesday, when the moon is the smallest and we have the darkest of nights, we need these miracles that we can live out ourselves. The miracle of effort, of kindness, of generosity and presence, of faith and hope. May these be miracles that you live out in your own life and that you share with the world around you. May it be so. Thank you very much.